Welcome to Sharp Football Analysis. Today, Freeman and I are going to discuss Devin Neal, Jayden Higgins, and everybody else you need to know to get you ready for the Week 13 waiver wire. So make sure you stick around. What is up, everybody? My name is Raymond Summerlin, and I'm joined, as I am early in the week, every single week, by the creator of FAABLab, a wonderful tool to use if you're trying to figure out how much you need to bid each week on all of the available free agents. Help me nab Emmanuel Wilson last week. That's FAABLab.app. Make sure you go and check that out. His name is Freeman Smith. He's here to talk about the biggest waiver ads, and we're excited to see him. How you doing, Freeman?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Excited to get those players for the playoff stretch.
You know, it is funny. Last week we talked about how, like, weighing out, okay, who are we actually picking up here? Because we had so much uncertainty about injuries and we didn't know, all right, is Jaylen Warren going to play? Is Josh Jacobs going to play? Is Bucky Irving going to play? Like, obviously later in the week, more interesting stuff came out about Bucky Irving, a lot of, the anonymous reports, but we'll see what happens kind of moving forward from that. But we ended up on Emmanuel Wilson as our number one ad, and that it turns out that worked out. If you get 28 carries and a bunch of goal line opportunities, you're going to get there. But, Josh Jacobs, are we seeing him on Thanksgiving? There's still a lot of injury uncertainty around the league. So it is still a very interesting week for waiver pickups.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it seems like this Sunday slate of games, there's a lot of injuries that kind of, flew under the radar, it seemed like. Yep. And like even last night you had Baker in a sling, and then today they're saying he might play, and obviously he's not a pickup, but it just seemed like that was a lot of the theme and kind of this whole last month, I feel like a lot of the injuries have been like, we don't really know what's going on, and more of a black box than years past. So I wonder if that has to do with, any of the injury reporting this year, or if it's just kind of an unlucky year, but a lot of mysterious injuries.
Well, I mean, not to go too far down the industry, but we're losing beat writers is ultimately what I think I saw something that the Timberwolves do not have a single beat writer who is going to away games right now. And I mean, I think it was the Timberwolves, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm sorry if it's the wrong team. If it is the Timberwolves, that's wild because, they're one of the better teams in the West. But yeah, there are teams around the league. I'm not going to name them because people are working hard, but there are teams around the league where you don't get a ton of information like you once did. And that's a problem. But some of the names also, you mentioned Baker Mayfield, and we'll see what happens there. Ashton Jeanty, we had Pete Carroll come out and say Jeanty left late in that game with an ankle injury, didn't come back, but it was very late and the game was already out of hand. So it's not surprising he didn't come back. I think it was like 4 minutes left in the game when he got hurt. It didn't look great. Pete Carroll came out and said that he expects him to practice this week, but Pete Carroll lies about injuries. That's one of the things we know about Pete Carroll. So we don't know what to do with that. And even if we knew that Jeanty was going to be out, are you going to new offensive coordinator, maybe he helps fix the run game, but we're throwing out Raheem Mostert, Zamir White. How excited are we? Dylan Labe, are we getting finally our Dylan Labe breakout? Yeah. What are we doing there? Rashee Rice left the game, came back, but they're obviously on a short week. Massive game for them this week against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving. And so what do you do there? Yeah, Jayden Daniels, we've got news that he's probably not playing, but you mentioned Baker Mayfield. We don't know what Bucky Irving's situation is. We don't know Marvin Harrison, Trey Benson. That's up in the air. Jaden Reed, that's up in the air. Darren Waller, that's up in the air. We still have all of these injury concerns as we're working through it. So it is another one of those weeks where you're almost having to guess at what you think is ultimately going to happen. So anybody on that list, any of the names I kind of mentioned that stick out to you either for them as maybe, okay, we're going to go pick this guy up, or creating opportunities for someone else?
Yeah, well, I just saw Jayden Daniels tweeted the Dark Knight coming out of the tunnel picture. So I took that to mean he's coming back. But
so Ian Rappaport said he was a long shot. I believe Dan Quinn also said he was a long shot, but that does suggest that he's coming back this season, which it's troubling news for me because in a 2-quarterback league, I saw that elbow and I thought it was. Yeah. I thought it was done, and I dropped him, and someone else smartly picked him up. And so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it seems like they are going to bring him back this year, but I don't know if this week. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, so that could have some effects. I think. I think probably Alvin Kamara is the biggest one. We'll talk about that more later. And then I think with the Bengals, if Joe Burrow comes back, then we've got a lot of uncertainty around that wide receiver core in general. So I could see that having some effect. But yeah, in general, it seems more like the opposite, where it seems like a lot of big names are potentially coming back, and if anything, we're losing waiver heroes like Sean Tucker, and maybe actually, there's not that much value to be gained from the waiver wire.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Darren Waller is the one that really stands out to me. Jayden Reed is probably the biggest name, and Jayden Reed is actually out there. He's been gone so long that through the waiver wire crunch, he's been dropped, and so he is actually out there in a decent number of leagues. But then that whole Packers wide receiver situation with Watson and Dobbs healthy, we have seen in the past that Reed doesn't play in two wide receiver sets, one or two wide receiver sets. In those, if you have 2 or 3 tight ends on the field, he's run 8 routes in those formations over the entirety of his career, and we're talking about over 300 plays or something like that. And so the Packers have used less of that since Tucker Kraft has been hurt, so that's a good thing for Reed. But yeah, like you're starting to say, well, what are we doing in this offense that wants to run the ball 30 times? Like, what are we getting out of these 3 guys? So that's the question with Reed. Waller stands out to me because the Dolphins need a target. He already opened his practice window. So he's already been designated a return. So that's a promising sign as we come out of the bye. And as we talked about last week, the schedule coming up is just really good for the Dolphins. They have the Saints, the Jets, the Steelers, the Bengals, and the Bucks over the next 5 weeks as we get through the fantasy playoffs. He was up to an 80.6% route rate the week before his injury. He has 4 end zone targets in 3 games before the injury. They need a target. So Waller really stands out to me as somebody, especially if you need a tight end you're just trying to cobble things together and make it to the fantasy playoffs. Darren Waller stands out to me a lot. And there's a Bengals tight end that stands out to me for just this week. We'll get to that in a second. But what do you think about Darren Waller?
Yeah, I think Waller's a good one. I think he's pretty forgotten about, so I would definitely not spend a lot of FAAB on him. Probably just pick him up for free. But yeah, he was pretty clearly the top red zone target, it seemed like, earlier in the season, and that was with Tyreek there. So it's, if anything, more open. Right in the beginning, it was
Tyreek, I think, was already gone by the time we got there, but maybe not. I could be remembering. It all runs together by the time we get to week 13.
Okay, well, that was with a sense of optimism, at least hope for the Dolphins. So I think, if anything, now that they've kind of committed to their fate, maybe they'll just funnel to Waller. And one interesting parallel is last year, Jonnu Smith was like the waiver darling of the year, and especially a tight end. And he was 14th on the list of most rostered players on championship rosters. So if you look at that list, it's like all just the usual suspects. It's like Barkley, Gibbs, and who you'd expect. And then I think Jonnu Smith stands out the most as far as ADP and coming off the waiver wire. So yeah, it seems like Mike McDaniels likes to scheme stuff up for the tight end, especially a tight end like Waller's, big physical catch point style. And they need another target, like you said. So I think he's a good option, especially if you're somebody who's lacking in tight end.
If you had to guess how many games Tyreek Hill played this year, because I guarantee you I would have guessed higher than the actual number, which is a hint for you. What would have been your guess?
Okay, yeah. I feel like I'm not going to try to break it down too much. I'll just say it feels like 4.
4 is the number. Good work.
Okay.
4 is the number. So yeah, so he was gone well before Waller returned. But that I would have gone over that number. I probably would have been like 6 or 7. Man, the season really is one of those beasts that just runs together on you, and you go, when did that happen? And then you get back to trying to think about 2024, as we're about to talk about here in a second, when you're thinking about, for the instance, the Packers, and you're trying to think about, okay, Watson, Dobbs, and Reed, you try to go back to 2024 and 2023, and then it all just becomes a jumbled mess in your head of, when did this happen? When was this player out? What happened with the whole Dobbs suspension thing? Remember that from last year?
Yeah.
What it all goes together in your brain. But 2024 is actually important as we talk about, you mentioned the Bengals and Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow also had an Insta post, and that one, I mean, it's pretty certain that he's going to be playing on Thursday against the Ravens. He actually called this game out, I believe, before the season, that they're having to play in Baltimore again on a Thursday, that was a problem. We actually bring that up in the schedule release, that Cincinnati's had to do this several years in a row. So it's not surprising to me he was targeting this week as the week he wants to come back. Jamar Chase is also back for this game. He served his suspension, but Tee Higgins is going to be out. He suffered a concussion on Sunday. It didn't look great. We're hoping for the best for Tee Higgins. That was a tough looking one, but he's already been ruled out for Thursday. So we have another situation that's similar to last week, in which one of the top wide receivers for Cincinnati is down. Now we know Joe Burrow is going to be in this game. We'll have to see what this game state looks like. The Ravens defense has been playing a lot better, but they've been playing a lot better against a very easy schedule of opposing quarterbacks. Vegas set this line, at least over at ESPN Bet, is 51.5 is the total. So obviously that is suggesting that we're going to see a lot of points for these teams. Ravens favored by 7. I've also seen like 6.5. I've seen them favored. So somewhere in that range, about a touchdown. And so the question is, obviously, you're playing Joe Burrow. If you still have him on your roster, you picked him up a few weeks ago when we talked about him, you're playing Joe Burrow. You're obviously playing Jamar Chase. He goes right back in the lineup. But we start to look at those tertiary options. You think, all right, we have Iosivas, we have Mike Gesicki, we have Mitchell Tinsley, as we mentioned last week. Penn State legend Mitchell Tinsley found his way into the end zone. Penn State legend Mitchell Tinsley. So there are some names there. Do you have any thoughts on any of those guys?
Iosivas also got a little banged up, right? It was like 3 plays in a row. It was pretty crazy. The quarterback, wide receiver 2 for the Bengals got injured, but then did he return?
He came back into the game. Yeah, but I believe the Tinsley touchdown was either around when he was out or like right after he came back. And so there was some of the kind of crossover there. But you're right, it was like Flacco hit his hand, Higgins had the concussion, and then Iosivas went out, like you said, all within I think 3 plays. It was wild.
Yeah, so I think Iosivas would be a pretty good play here. I mean, it's not, especially like Joe Flacco had that game where he had like an 80% target share for Jamar Chase or something. I feel like Burrow's probably going to spread the ball around a little bit more. So even if Jamar completely dominates, somebody else is getting targets, right? And I think Yoshi's probably the next best option. I kind of like Gesicki in this spot, though. I feel like it's a good matchup. And Gesicki's popped before, especially in situations, I think, when one of the big 2 wide receivers is out. And just in general, it feels like Joe Burrow coming back, limited mobility, might be looking for something like in that Mike Gesicki part of the field. I could see that benefiting him, like those quick little outs. And maybe in like a PPR scam sort of way, I could see Gesicki having a pretty good tight end day. And again, if you just need a 1-week fill-in, I think he's probably going to be relatively free.
So obviously we have to say again, as just a caveat, Penn State legend Mike Gesicki. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But going back to last year, this is one of the reasons I was thinking about 2024. Last year with Higgins off the field, Iosivas had a 10.7% target share, despite running route on 86.4% of the dropbacks when Higgins was off the field last year. So you're thinking, who got the targets? The answer was Mike Gesicki. Mike Gesicki was the guy that got the targets whenever Higgins was off the field. We already saw him last week. Last week was his first week back from injured reserve. We already saw him get involved, 68.4% route share. He had 6 targets. That was 1 fewer than Iosivas. Iosivas led the team in targets last week. So it was 1 fewer than Iosivas, but he was on the field a lot, at least a lot in terms of the kind of tight end that he is. That's a pretty good route share for him. Gesicki was targeted on 26.1% of his routes without Higgins on the field last season. There was that 3-game run from Higgins when Higgins was out. Gesicki was on the field for 66.7% of the dropbacks last year, targeted on 24.5% of his routes. He was the tight end 4 in receptions, the tight end 3 in yards, the tight end 2 in touchdowns. You look at all of that and you say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Will it happen again? Maybe not. Like, things could be fickle. Jamar Chase is he's going to get a ton of targets. This Baltimore defense has been very good. Even against like tight ends, against everybody, this Baltimore defense has been good. Have they played a lot of really good quarterbacks? No, they haven't, but they've been good. So there are lots of caveats here for Gesicki, but yeah, I think he's somebody, if you need a 1-week starter, we don't have any buys this week, but if you need a 1-week starter for something, you've just been cobbling it together at tight end, I do think Gesicki is an option. Waller is a much better, like, long-term looking towards the fantasy playoffs kind of ad. Whereas I think Gesicki is somebody who I would like, if I was doing rankings, I would have him ranked higher. We'll see where Rich has him in the rankings. Go and check that out on Wednesday when he releases his rankings. But we'll see. That's kind of how I would see those two. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the whole situation just really highlights how much Jermaine Burton really dropped the ball, right? He should, like, with Jamar Chase out, he didn't suit up. I think, yeah, it's officially over, I think, for him. And yeah, this would have been a perfect situation. Need more draft capital, I think, than any of these guys. So yeah, just interesting thing to think about how a year ago he would have been somebody we would have been definitely talking about in this situation. But yeah, I think it'll be a pretty good week for Gesicki, and Ravens had some defensive injuries
Kyle
this
Hamilton.
week too. So,
yeah.
Well, wasn't there? I thought there might have been one more, but not exactly. I don't think you're gonna have a safety on Gesicki, but it definitely is overall might just lead to a higher scoring game.
Well, with how Hamilton has been playing, and moving around a lot. Yeah. So, and I mean, he's just, one of the best defensive players in the league. And so having him out improves game state. And I do think that game state part of it, even if it's not a particularly great matchup, that game state part of it is important to remember. If Vegas is right, and if this is a 50-point game total kind of game, then just based purely on game state, we'll see what happens. But then again, the Ravens should be able to beat this Bengals defense, but the Bengals defense wasn't shredded in the way that we expected this past week, except by, Hunter Henry, our one true DFS king, Hunter Henry. But it wasn't shredded in the way we expected this past week. We definitely haven't seen the best of Lamar Jackson since returning from injury. And so they also have injuries on the offensive side of the ball. We'll see if Rashad Bateman's able to make it back on the short week. So yeah, could this game disappoint us from like a back and forth way? Yeah, maybe so. But you're playing, I think, on that game state with any of the guys not named Jamar Chase here.
Turns out that the Bengals are good at defense only within the 1 yard line, like 7 times in a row otherwise. But yeah, shout out to the NFL. This is, I think, the best Thanksgiving week of games I can ever remember. I mean, every single game on Thursday and the Friday Bears-Eagles game is awesome. Really, really a great year for ignoring your family at Thanksgiving.
The problem is that Sunday is ugly.
I know.
As a result. Sunday's not great. I also have the added benefit as I'm an Aston Villa supporter, as I probably have mentioned. And Aston Villa plays in the Europa League because Europe, it turns out, doesn't care about American Thanksgiving. And so they play on the Europa League at 11:45 a.m. Central Time on Thanksgiving. And so we'll see what TVs I can arrange. I've already promised to smoke a turkey, so I'm hopeful that I can have it finish right around the end of that. I can just I'm outside with the smoker and just have the TVs on. We'll see what I'm able to finagle as we get through here.
Aston Villa might outscore the Bucks from last night anyway, so it might as well watch them.
It might end up happening. All right, let's move on to talk about some of the ads. You already mentioned one. We'll talk about Devin Neal. Before we do that, I do want to mention, if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and your podcast player of choice or over at YouTube. If you do subscribe on YouTube, turn on notifications. You don't miss any of our content. We are going to have a bit of an odd week here from content because Rich and I normally record a fantasy show on Thursday. Obviously, we're not going to be doing that. We're going to try to at least speak to our family somewhat in between football and football games. We'll talk to them a little bit. But Warren Sharp and I will actually be recording a podcast on Wednesday about that Thursday game. So make sure you're signed up for that. And then also you want to be signed up for that Friday show. We give out a featured prop on that Friday show. It's 10-2 this season. Those are free bets given out completely for free on that Friday show with Warren Sharp. So make sure you check that out. And then, as I said at the top, make sure you head over to FAABLab.app and check out Freeman's site. Again, it helped me get Emmanuel Wilson last week. Figure out what do I need to bid to get this guy. It's a great tool. Make sure you go and use it. Someone you might be interested in looking up over at FAABLab this week is Devin Neal, who's available in 98.2% of ESPN leagues. We saw Alvin Kamara leave with a knee injury. I believe it's now been reported as an MCL sprain. We'll see what happens with that. There aren't a ton of weeks left in the season. Those sprains tend to last a long time. I wonder if he ends up on injured reserve. Obviously, an older player, seems to be something more of his swan song here in New Orleans. So this will be interesting to see if whoever ends up taking over this role just starts the rest of the season. Devin Neal was the running back, but we also saw Taysom Hill. We know they have Audric Estime on the roster. Do they add somebody? This is an interesting spot here from a waiver perspective. How much do I spend on this guy?
Yeah, I think it's a good ad. I mean, I think people are going to look and just be kind of unimpressed with Devin Neal. Like, he hasn't really popped that much, but I mean, just everything else. She's a rookie running back in a team that has a pretty fast pace of play. I feel like people like to say Kellen Moore runs a ton of plays. They've been like around top 10 this year in plays ran. So it's not like they're exactly just, running 70 plays a game or something, but at least it's a relatively fast-paced offense. Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator last year with the Eagles, so we all know like what he is capable as far as run game scheming, and just in general, I think what else are you looking for at week 13 besides a running back who might get a starting role for the rest of the season? I think it's a pretty easy add. I would say if you had a bet, he's probably not going to end up being a RB2 even, but there's a chance. And then also the ceiling is so high when you just have a rookie that might be getting a lot of workload, and you never know. They might want to see what they have here, really like give him the ball in both the receiving game and the running game. He had a huge college production, so he wasn't like a super athletic guy. I think coming into the draft, it was 6th rounder, I believe. So it's not like he has this crazy draft capital, but he is one of those guys that was just super productive in college. And sometimes I feel like that translates really well in a way that is hard to see it on draft day, right? Like it's just one of those things where he might not have the fastest 40 time, or he might not seem that explosive, but then maybe he just ends up being somebody who has good vision and works well in this offense. So I think he's worth the ad. I think if I was comparing him to an ad we had already this year, like Tyrone Tracy went for 38% when Scadaboo went down. And I think it's a pretty good comparison because we'd already seen Tracy and we knew he wasn't looking that good. His metrics were pretty bad. And we didn't even think that the team liked him that much. And yet he went for 38%. And that was one of the biggest FAAB, like as far as number of votes, that was one of the biggest ones of the year. So I would say it's probably too pricey. I think looking back, 38% for Tyrone Tracy looks a little too
yes, I was going to, as soon as you were done, apologize to everybody, but yes, continue.
Yeah. But just so that's as far as setting a benchmark, I think that's where it would have been a few weeks ago. Right now, you probably are in a different situation, right? Where half your league is checked out, maybe you don't have to spend that much. I would say it's definitely too much. On the other end of things, last year, Amir Abdullah went for 6%. And I think he was a guy who I was like, Amir Abdullah, no way. And then he ended up being great down the stretch. So it's good to just keep an open mind with running backs, I think. And if you can get them for somewhere between there, maybe split the middle, 15%, Devin Neal, 20% even, I think that would be a pretty good acquisition.
It sounds like you're higher on him than I am, which is, fine. Like he's definitely an ad. Like there's no question about that. My questions are, I have lots of questions. The first is obviously just the offensive environment, which that's a concern that we've had with Kamara, right? We haven't seen running backs aside from a few Kendre Miller runs, and man, Kendre Miller, I wish he were healthy right now. That would be great, right? But we haven't really seen running backs have a ton of success here. So that's a concern. Do they bring somebody else in? Do we get more Audric Estime? I don't know. I think it was a pretty big red flag that we saw Taysom Hill have one more carry. I believe it was one more carry than Devin Neal over the final 3 quarters. Taysom Hill had one of the goal-to-go carries. We know that he'll be used there. Tyler Shuck actually had 4 goal-to-go carries in that game. It was kind of odd the way that worked out. I believe he kept it on a read option. There was I believe an attempted tush push that didn't work out. So there were a lot of Tyler Shuck goal-to-go carries there, which that's a little bit concerning. What I will say, the quotes after the game made it seem like they didn't want Taysom Hill to take on the kind of running back work he had in that game. And so that's good, I guess, moving forward. But also, okay, well, if you didn't want him to take on that work, why didn't you just give the ball to Devin Neal? Isn't that a bit of a red flag that they would rather Taysom Hill go do something he wasn't practicing than give the ball to Neal? Like that feels like a red flag to me. He did run 35 routes. That's great. The schedule coming up is good. They get the Dolphins, the Bucks, the Panthers, the Jets, and the Titans. The Dolphins have actually quietly been pretty good against the run as of late. The Bucks have gone the other way, especially in the passing game. The Bucks have gone the other way. So, that kind of evens itself out. Either way, that is a good schedule the rest of the way. And it's a good schedule in terms of we don't expect the Saints to get blown out by the Jets or the Titans or probably the Dolphins or probably the Panthers. And so and we'll see what happens with Baker Mayfield. We don't know who's playing quarterback for the Bucks when that game happens. And so you're expecting them to be in the game enough to push running. So we're making the good and bad arguments for Devin Neal, which I think illustrates what kind of waiver ad he is. He's somebody that you don't probably want to spend if it's late in the season, you just absolutely need a Hail Mary swing, go out and get him, right? But I wouldn't want to spend more than 10% on him. Maybe try to keep my powder dry for another week and see what happens, especially if I'm already in the playoffs and I've already got a good team. But again, necessity is what it is at this point in the season. If you got to go get him, go and get him. But it sounds like I'm a little bit lower on him than you, but I definitely get your point of view.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of the last ship out of port. Like, I don't know if we'll have another. I don't know if we'll have another running back like this. I could see having a situation where somebody goes down and then we are getting like a split backfield where we know it's going to be a split backfield and maybe we take the pass catcher or something like that. But this is might be the last time that we have somebody who actually could step up and be a feature back down the stretch. So it's not that I believe so much in the situation or the talent. I just think that as far as lottery tickets, if you have FAAB left and you need a running back, I don't think you're going to get a better chance than this.
Is Last Helicopter Out of Saigon, is that still a reference in the zeitgeist? I don't actually know. Like, we need something to replace that for the younger folks. I say younger folks. I wasn't alive at that point, but I remember my parents and grandparents saying it, but I suppose I don't know if that one's still out there. Let me give you another running back then. I wanted to talk about this running back last week, but since they were on bye, we didn't. I did put him in the column, and I'll have him in there again this week. Let's talk about Chris Rodriguez then for the Commanders, because I'm interested in what I would much rather. I will have Chris Rodriguez ahead of Devin Neal this week. I don't say much rather. There are concerns with Chris Rodriguez as well. I will bring those up as we get through this, but he's available in 91.2% of ESPN leagues for obviously the Commanders. I think I would rather Chris Rodriguez than Devin Neal. Where do you stand on that one?
Yeah, Chris Rodriguez is interesting. I think, first of all, the schedule's pretty brutal compared to
so bad. I was going to bring it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is kind of a good split between, like, if you're locked in the playoffs and you want to stash, I think Chris Rodriguez is a better stash because they have the Cowboys maybe in the
they have a Giants game in week 15 that really sticks out as like, okay, that's one we could be interested in.
And then they have the Eagles twice still, and then I think they have the Cowboys too, which is
they get Broncos and Vikings the next two games. You're not really interested in those. And then you brought up the Cowboys. They have the Cowboys in week 17.
17. Okay,
sandwich between those Eagles games. But the Cowboys are like first carry allowed to running backs over the last 2 weeks since the trade. Now, those running backs were the Raiders running backs, and then obviously Ashton Genty. They've struggled to run all year. They've since fired their offensive coordinator, and then Saquon Barkley, who we know kind of the issues that Philadelphia has had at times running the ball. And so you do wonder how much stock you can put into those Cowboys numbers, but the Cowboys running game does not look like the matchup it was before. And so when you look at those 5 teams that they have in the remainder of what we would call the fantasy season, week 18 out. So we've got the Broncos, the Vikings, the Eagles, Giants, Eagles, Cowboys. The Giants is the only one that sticks out. Now, the Giants is a great matchup. And if we get Jayden Daniels back for that, you're feeling great about that. But like, I think what the point you're making is a great one. Like, can you afford not having him for the next 2 weeks in the hopes that maybe you get to play him in the first week of the fantasy playoffs? If so, then that's great. But wouldn't your team already be good enough that you don't have to worry about playing Chris Rodriguez? It's kind of like, it's a double-edged sword, but I think it's a great point.
Yeah, but he is one of those guys. He's had, like, last year he had a couple big games. He kind of reminds me of Sean Tucker in that sense, where he's like has his 1 or 2 big games a year, and so maybe you can take advantage of that this year. I mean, he had was it 15 touches last game? So he's definitely trending up, and he even had a reception, which is completely uncharted territory for Chris Rodriguez. I think he only had 1 reception all year last year, and he actually played a considerable amount. So that's the other thing. He has basically 0 receiving profile, right? And so it's kind of a tough combo. If they're playing good running defenses and he has no chance of catching balls, then he's got to just have a nose for the end zone and just be an efficient runner, I guess, which he does seem relatively good. Like, I think the talent is actually pretty good. So I think he's somebody I'd be interested in, but I just don't really see a situation where you trust him. Like you said, it seems like you're going to have 1 week and it's going to be really hard. You're going to be staring at like his game log and see that he had 6 points, 4 points, and then you're going to plug him in against the Giants and hope that he goes off.
Yeah, I So I would say that Giants game is what you're targeting. And the hope you get is because we've seen this. He left, what was it? He left week 10 early with an injury, still came back and played in week 11, and he's been playing more. He's looked like the clear lead back in those situations, played 29 snaps to 17 for Bill Krosky-Merritt in week 11 before the bye. Then they go on bye. And so your hope, I would think, if you pick him up and stash him, I've since changed my mind back. I will have Devin Neal ahead of him now that I'm thinking about it. But I do think it's situational. So that'll be in the write-up. Go and check up the article at sharpfootballanalysis.com. But what you want to see over the next 2 weeks is you're not going to probably be very happy with the production against the Broncos and Vikings. Maybe he falls in the end zone. He has been, getting that kind of work. And so maybe that's something that happens for you. What you want to see is that spread between he and Krosky-Merritt hopefully continue to grow, so where you can feel confident against the Giants, which, as we just saw on Sunday, if you're playing running back against the Giants, you're feeling great about that, right? And so that would be the one thing. That would be the one thing that would make me say, all right, I'm going to pick this guy up. I'm going to stash him. I'm going to hope we get the usage. And if we do, then maybe I can use him comfortably in week 15. But yeah, that's really where we're sitting here with Rodriguez. Man, you really brought me down, because I think you're 100% right. I think you're 100% right. I was trying to make myself excited, but I think you're 100% right.
I think this just shows, like, you're talking about how hard it is to remember last year. I feel like the season gets broken up into like halves or thirds with storylines, and you can remember last year at the end, but it's so hard to remember last year in the beginning. And I think in the future we'll look back on the whole Bill thing, and it's going to seem like a fever dream, right? the Bill is going to just be a perennial like third running back that eats away at production, and maybe I'll find career, but I think the hype train is officially over.
It's been very up and down. As a podcast that was in on Bill as like the last pick in best ball drafts early in the summer, and then we saw what happened to him, and then obviously it wasn't looking great, and then obviously it was looking good, and then it started looking not so great. We might still have another turn in us in the Bill Krosky-Merritt.
Yeah, maybe Jayden Daniels. Well, that's what he needs to get back to business, but.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'm skeptical.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens here. All right, one more I want to talk about. This one, actually, I feel a lot better about this guy based on what we've seen. And you called him out last week, and that is Jayden Higgins. Still available in 76.7% of ESPN leagues. So he has been picked up in a lot of leagues, which makes sense. He's had 14 targets in the 2 games before Thursday night. But I think what we saw on Thursday night from him definitely has to have you excited as we move into getting CJ Stroud back and kind of moving down the stretch run for the Texans.
Yeah, and I mean, he just is the perfect post-buy rookie wide receiver, like high draft capital. I think he's second round, but he was really early, right? So he's like almost a borderline first-round pick, which is, I mean, pretty crazy draft capital. And he seems to just have a nose for the end zone. Like some of these guys, you can't explain it. And I know we love to talk about regression and be like, oh, Jordan Addison can't do it again, blah, blah, blah. But some players just do find the end zone, and that's their skill set. And it seems like that's what he is. And Houston offense has been a little more watchable lately, and they're fighting for playoff position and things like that. So it seems like they really have made a concerted effort to get him more involved. And I feel like he is the exact kind of bet you want to make. He also is right now, he's running more routes every week, getting a higher target share. So it's a pretty safe pick with a pretty high ceiling. And of course, if anything happened to Nico Collins or something and down the stretch, I mean, he could go nuclear. And so I really like him as well. And if he's still available, I think that's a no-brainer. I take him over the running backs.
Yeah, absolutely. If he's available, I'm not through the column yet, but he's looking like my number one ad. You mentioned the route rate going up. It was 42.6% in week 9, and we're up to 67.7% on Thursday night. So we'd like to see that keep growing. Like, that's the problem. I brought this up last week with him. He's had over his last 3 games, 7, 7, and 9 targets, but that's come on like a 30% target rate per route, especially with Nico Collins there. Nico Collins, last week it didn't happen for him, but Nico Collins in the 3 games before that had a ton of targets, 11, 15, and 10 targets. Mm-hmm. So with Nico Collins there, it's going to be hard for a second wide receiver to get targeted on that high a percentage of their routes. Like, it's just not, unless they just completely devote the passing game to those 2 guys. If they pull the Rams, for instance, and we just have those 2 guys, which I'm not against, by the way, Texans, have fun. I think both those 2 guys are good, but like, unless they do that, it's going to be hard for him to get that, which means we're just going to need him to run more routes. What I will say is that, we talked about negative for the schedule with Rodriguez. The schedule this week, the schedule for the Texans is actually, quietly pretty good, I think. This week they get the Colts. It's a massive game, but we know how talented the Colts are now on the outside, and Higgins runs like 85% of his routes on the outside. So he's going to be seeing a lot of Ward. He's going to be seeing a lot of Sauce Gardner. That's not ideal. The Chiefs kind of got there in the end last week, but it's still, that's not a place to be. After that, though, they get the Chiefs. The Chiefs are 26th in yards per target allowed to outside wide receivers over their last 5 games. Then they get the Cardinals. Then they get the Raiders. This is really setting up, as you said, as a classic late season rookie breakout. Like, that's really what this is looking at. Like, if he continues to get that playing time increase, if CJ Stroud comes back and the Texans offense continues to look competent, right, especially in those better matchups that they're getting, and hopefully the high, the high scoring matchup they might get against the Chiefs and maybe against the Colts as well. And so there's a lot of really good green flags here for Higgins. And like I said, I'm not through the column yet, but I would be surprised if he's not the guy I'm targeting number 1 overall in terms of pickups this week.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to look back. Like last year draft time, we were drafting Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Nico Collins all in the first 5 rounds, probably 6 rounds at most. And people were like, oh, there's too many mouths to feed. One of those guys will have to fall off. But nobody was saying that they couldn't support 2 wide receivers. It was like a foregone conclusion that at least 2, it's just a matter of who's the odd man out, right? Now we're talking about, like, is it even possible for a second wide receiver to be fantasy relevant? So I think it goes to show how quickly we change. And obviously that offense is pretty unimaginative. It's not like they're going to be throwing tons of times a game either. But I think it's not crazy that we could see down the stretch, if there's a little bit of return to form for CJ Stroud, that we do have 2 wide receivers supported. And like last year, it seemed like Stephon Diggs was really serving a unique role for Stroud there, like with those crossers and a little easier kind of possession wide receiver outlet stuff. So I could see that being a valuable role for Jayden Higgins if Nico Collins is more of like the big threat on the outside. But yeah, it does seem right now like Jayden Higgins is more of the red zone guy and running just as a classic outside wide receiver. So I'd like, if they start using him a more unique way and stuff like that, I could see them supporting too. But right now it seems like maybe you'd need something to happen Nico Collins for him to really break out in a big way.
Well, I do think they could support 2 wide receivers. I just wonder if will Higgins play enough, because you still have Christian Kirk there. You still have Jalen Noel there. You still have Dalton. What I want to call him Dalton Strange, which that's not even close to Dalton Schultz. There we go. I don't know why my brain did that. This is 40, kids. This is what happens when you get to 40. But yeah, so they still have Schultz there too. And so I just wonder, it's a matter, we need him to play more than 2/3. We need him to run a route on more than 2/3 of the dropbacks, I would say, is what we need to continue. But pick him up now, because that could happen. And obviously he seems like he's a talented guy who can make plays, and they have prioritized getting him the ball, which that's really important as we're moving forward. All right, let's get to some deep cuts here as we move forward. A lot of options this week. As always, this is the section where we're highlighting players who are rostered in fewer than 5% of ESPN leagues, or maybe just a little bit more under the radar. We've had some good names come out of here. We've also had me try to sell you a bunch of terrible wide receivers on terrible teams, which I will do again this week. So buckle up. The bit continues on. But who are you looking at? Who are some deep cuts that you're interested in this week?
Yeah. Okay. So the first one I sent you is Greg Dortch.
Dortch. Good old Dortch.
What do you think about Dortch?
I just think if Marvin Harrison is back, this thing with Michael Wilson is very interesting. I actually posted something about it on Twitter and Blue Sky today, that over his first 38 games, he was targeted on 13.6% of his routes. And over the last 2 games, he's been targeted on 33.3% of his routes, which is just strange. And he's had obviously players ahead of him in the pecking order. That offense has had issues. There are Kyler Murray concerns throughout a large chunk of his career. And so, obviously they have Trey McBride, obviously Marvin Harrison is there. So like there are reasons you can explain that away, but also like how much a wide receiver is targeted on his routes is generally an indication of how often he's open. Again, maybe that's not the case if the quarterback is not, able to get the ball to Michael Wilson where he needs the ball, or what we see. So that change for him is very interesting. And then I would assume we get Marvin Harrison back this week. Like I would guess. I kind of thought he might come back last week, but we'll get him back this week. And so you're just like, I don't know about Dortch. He's run a route on about 2/3 of the dropbacks the last 2 weeks. They've obviously had a ton of dropbacks over that time. That has helped him get targets and opportunities, even with McBride and Wilson dominated targets. And then you look at his 2 touchdowns. One was like garbage time. One was kind of like it felt like a coverage break this past week that he got into it. So like it seems very flimsy to me, especially if Marvin Harrison comes back. That's kind of where I would stand on Greg Dortch.
Okay, how about any running back 2s don't really have any clear path to relevancy, but maybe look more explosive than the guy in front of him? Like specifically Keaton Mitchell. I mean, he didn't do much this last week, but he does look like he's getting a little more involved. And before this, he was getting more carries. Any interest there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Justice Hill was back this week from injury, but Mitchell still got more work. They don't really play the same position, if you know what I'm saying, in that backfield. Totally. So it's not really surprising with that. We know what the schedule is for them. We've highlighted the Ravens schedule a lot, right? There's a reason why they, I believe, are the prohibitive favorite now to win that division, despite, I think, still being a game down on the Steelers, if I'm right, if I'm correct in that. So, it's there. Mitchell's going to hit. He's going to need a Derrick Henry injury, right? That's what he's going to need. But if that happens, we know how explosive he can be. I do think he's going to get a lot of work if that happens. I do think it'll be more of a timeshare between he and Hill, but I think we'll see him get a lot more of like the early down stuff. So yeah, I mean, if we're talking about people to stash on the bench and see what happens, not hope for an injury to Derrick Henry by any means, but just kind of see what happens. Yeah, no pushback.
Yeah, that's what I think. He just kind of emerged as one of like the best looking handcuffs over the last month, I think. And I mean, imagine if you're a running back hungry team and you are going into the playoffs and all of a sudden you have Keaton Mitchell getting 20 touches a game for the Ravens and like 55-point over-under shootouts. It just would be a perfect storm. I mean, that's the type of thing that we could look back and just be like, half of championship rosters end up having Keaton Mitchell. I feel like, don't want to wish for anything happen to Derrick Henry, but it's of course like just rare nowadays to have a backup that has that much potential.
Yeah, and he's available in a ton more leagues than someone like Brian Robinson or Tank Bigsby. I'm just going through my list here. Blake Corum, Ray Davis, although Ray Davis is available in a lot of leagues as well. He's available in a ton more leagues than those guys. So there's like, I'm not going to push back at all if you have room on your bench of taking a guy that could take any run, any touch that he has to the house and could get a big workload if just one thing goes for him. I got some names here for you as I continue to try to sell everybody on the worst offenses in the league. Let's get started with John Mechie. I'm not selling my condo yet on Adonai Mitchell Island. That's trademark Zach Lowe. I'm not selling that. But what do you think about John Mechie?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really see it happening, to be honest, but John Mechie's awesome. Like, I hope it does. And he's one of those things that it's very narrative driven, but his story is so cool.
Great story. Yeah.
And Rebar talks about the rule of cool. How about we need a rule of like when they make a 30 for 30 about you type of guy. Like, he survived the horrible setbacks of having cancer and being traded to the Jets. And, I think that he's one of those guys that's probably not going to happen for him, but shown a lot of perseverance and he looked really good. And so probably not, but I don't really see a way where they end up supporting 2 wide receivers, but you never know.
But maybe he's the one, right? And we still don't know what's going to happen with Garrett Wilson. Every week, obviously, we get closer to his availability to come back. Will he actually come back? We don't know. 82.1% route rate over the last 2 games. And the Jets were not dead last in neutral pass rate with Tyrod Taylor this past week.
Who was?
I don't remember who was. Okay. And obviously, by the way, we record this on, I forgot to mention it earlier, we record this on Monday before Monday Night Football, so we still got a couple teams to play. And so if something happens on Monday Night Football and we don't talk about it, for instance, no, I'm not even gonna put that in the world that something's gonna happen. But yeah, that's why we haven't talked about it. But yeah, so two more teams you have to play, but I can't remember who was last. But they were like 20. I think they were like 23rd, which, I mean, if we're talking about improvement, it's there. Taylor, actually, I wrote this down. Taylor has 21 and 15 dropbacks in the first 2 quarters of his 2 starts this season. So the first half of his 2 starts this season. Justin Fields averaged just under 13.6 dropbacks per first half in his starts this season. And so, yeah, we're already above those averages with Taylor, and Taylor's going to turn more of those dropbacks into throws and attempts than Fields will. So yeah, all of that's good. How about, we kind of mentioned this guy last week, but I want to mention him again because they came out of bye and we saw the usage kind of remain the same, and that's Devon Vele.
It's sort of the same thing. I don't think it's going to happen for him either, but yeah, both these guys are interesting because they're both guys that were traded for, and it's like we can try to, tell ourselves we know what's going on, but these teams, when they actually trade for somebody, it usually means they have some plan. So I think the Vele trade was like they gave up a lot actually to get him, so that still makes me a little excited. And yeah, there's a lot of room there for wide receiver to emerge. So I think that one I'd be more into than Mechie. It's funny, last year this time Vele was one of the top waiver ads, or one of the top FAAB ads, and I think he was like number 2 week 13 on FAABLab. So one of those things where you totally forget, and then you look back and you're like, am I making the same mistake as last year? But
he had that one game. It was that one game with the Broncos. He had like 10 catches or something wild like that. And then yeah, obviously it didn't work out for him. But on the field for 94% of the dropbacks last 2 games for the Saints since they traded away Rashid Shaheed, tied for second on the team with 7 targets on Sunday. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
And Olave's got a pretty spotted injury history, so I wouldn't say that it's a sure thing that he plays every game either.
Targets are targets is what I would say in deep leagues. And again, we're talking about deep leagues with these guys. So there you are. Those are us trying to sell you some
Saints and Jets like every week. No Titans this week.
I almost brought up DK, but first of all, I think he's rostered in too many leagues for this, and also I can't do it anymore. I mean, thank you, DK. Thank you for the points. I'm in a dynasty league. It's a best ball league, which is an interesting kind of wrinkle because you have to both balance the I need weekly upside to win with also long term, right? So like if you're stashing somebody that you don't really expect to have a lot of usage now, like you're giving up one of those roster spots that could be a spike week player if you wanted to pick up somebody, like a Marvin Mims, although Marvin Mims is
exactly what I was thinking of. That's funny.
Marvin Mims is both of those things, and he's been on my roster for a long time. That's neither here nor there. But like that's the kind of thing. So it makes it really interesting. And so I drafted DK in that league, and he's been providing me these spike weeks. So I really appreciate it. And long may it continue. And Cam Ward actually had a good fantasy game.
Yeah, Cam Ward looked awesome. And maybe they'll figure it out. I mean, DK is super athletic, and that when you see a guy returning punts and then also doing the receiving game. But yeah, we've talked about him and other Titans receivers enough this year that I think it's probably not interesting anymore.
They do get the Jaguars this week. It's not a bad matchup. Io Manor, we'll see what happens with his injury. Van Jefferson's probably not the guy. Gunnar Helm's another guy that they kind of got. It makes sense. Like, let's start getting to these rookies. Let's hopefully get a good finish here for Cam Ward, because I do, like you said, I thought Cam Ward looked good in that game. I was a little bit nervous based on what we saw in the first half, because I bet the Seahawks first half -6.5, and it came through for me in the end. But there was some concern. JSN said, "I'm done with this." Caught a really long touchdown, and that was pretty much that. But yeah, there was some concern based on how he looked against that defense. So long may it continue. I'm hoping for the best for Cam Ward. All right, that's it for us. We're gonna get out of here. Thank you for listening to this point. If you listen to this point, we appreciate it. Subscribe wherever you find us. Remember, keep an eye out for a bit of abbreviated schedule. This week should be something released to your feed on Wednesday, something else released to your feed on Friday. So make sure you check out that. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis. You'll find my waiver column there, let's say by midday on Tuesday. So make sure you check that out. Head over to FAABLab. It'll let you know how much you need to bid on these guys. How much do I need to bid on Jayden Higgins, on Devin Neal, on those kind of guys. So make sure you head over there. And Freeman and I will be back to talk with you next week.